Hi, and welcome to How I Did It, the video series where I sit down in front of a microphone and I tell you how I did things. This is the second video in a little mini arc about the development of my most recent visual novel release, Meninx, which I made for NaNoRenO in March. A little bit of a post-mortem, I guess. This video is going to focus a bit on the art. What you should be seeing is a time-lapse of one of the art pieces I created for the game from inception to ending, going through the modeling process and then the line art and coloring. From a technical perspective, I shortcutted the shit out of doing the art for this. I did not do initial sketches. I used the design doll maker, which is what I use for most of my posing. And normally I just do a little wireframe and I use as a pose and I draw in my own musculature and stuff. As a shortcut to make drawing a little bit easier, I just made the models. I made sure their musculature is what I wanted. And then I just literally lined to the model. And then went back through and did all the color changes and all that kind of good stuff. This was a shortcut. A super duper hyper ridiculous shortcut that I only use when I'm in a very, very, very compact amount of time. I find it to be very useful to get art out quickly. And the sacrifice you make for it is it can look a little weird and you have to kind of play with it a little bit. But I find it to be an effective technique in these particular circumstances. I wouldn't recommend it all the time, but it worked for this game. So, no complaints. Stylistically speaking, I had no idea what the fuck I wanted to do with this game. I really didn't. For Naxxus, it was really, really easy because I was like looking up NaNoRenO and I was like, bam, that's what I want. I want to mimic that style. I made the two sprites of Ys and Ari in like 6 hours maybe total between the both of them. And then I just did these very like abstract backgrounds because I was focusing on the story. I didn't really care about the art as much. I made that game in like 8 days. Those are the shortcuts I took. For this game, because I was coming back to these characters and I was exploring them more in depth, like, oh, who are they? What are they like? What's their relationship like? I definitely wanted to have something that was a little more realistically representative, that wasn't quite so stylized. I knew that for sure. And I also wanted to make sure I had art of them interacting, which I didn't have in the previous game. I actually wanted to show them touching and feeling and placing hands on each other. And so I definitely had the idea that I was going to do quote-unquote sprites, but they weren't going to be the standard, person standing, and they talk to each other. They were going to be like, always looking to the right or something, because I knew I wanted to the NVL mode, which is what I do, which is what I did, which is like the bigger text box. I knew I wanted to do that because I did that for Naxxus. I really liked it. And so right away I knew, okay, I'm going to have a layout where I have the text on the right taking up most of the screen, and then I have the art taking up a portion of the screen on the left. I knew that right away. There's a game called Floratbond by GB Patch, and they do something very similar. That I really like that aesthetic. I think it was, they do something, well, it's not, they flip-flop their art and their writing, and I think they give more space for the art. But I liked that approach, and I thought that was a really interesting way of conveying the story, and so I wanted to kind of play with that layout. So I knew I was going to do that, for sure. I was going to have them have the art on a sliver on the left, and then most of the screen was going to be text. I didn't know what kind of style I was going to go for. My initial thoughts were like, oh, I'm going to do this, like, psychedelic art, and it's going to be, like, that's going to be the inspiration. And it's going to be, it's going to tie into the whole fact that, Ari, which if you listen to the writing video, if you haven't yet, Ari, gets drugged. Well, she doesn't get drugged. She takes a drug and goes crazy. So I was going to do that. I was going to do some psychedelic art, something very Woodstock or something very 60s, something very, far out, man. I did a lot of hours of research into psychedelic art. What's it look like? What are its hallmarks? What are its key features? And one, that was a lot more difficult than I thought. It's a very interesting art movement that is a very kind of gut feeling sort of art movement. It's like you when you see it, you recognize it as psychedelic, but you can't necessarily pinpoint exactly what makes it that way. It was very difficult to kind of pin down a sort of rubric. And what I was able to cobble together as far as a psychedelic art style, I was like, I don't know that I can translate that into something like this. I think if it was any kind of other game, like maybe if I had more time, or if there was a more comprehensive art aspect to it, I might have been able to. But to translate into something like, okay, this is a sprite, this is a background, I wasn't 100% sure if I could do it. So instead, I decided to just go with a more kind of abstract, floating figures in space, representative sort of art where, things weren't very detailed, but they were realistic. And I chose a color, and I had chosen the pink and green color scheme early because that was my psychedelic ideas, and I brought those color schemes back in with the pink and the greens and the blue and the dark purples and stuff. And then I was like, okay, well, how am I actually going to do the art? Like, how am I going to approach it? And my initial thoughts were, okay, I'll have a sprite of Issa doing a pose, and then Ari doing a pose that can match it, and they'll layer. I had that idea really, really early on of, like, there'll be a scene where Yisa has her arm on Ari's shoulder, and, like, but they'll be individual sprites, and so I can fade them in and fade them out and use them modular as a sort of, use this one here, and then, push them together as needed. But then it came to the point of figuring out, okay, so what would those poses be? And that was something I wasn't going to be able to figure out until I actually finished the story. And so I did. I put those thoughts to the side. I put those on the back burner. I was like, okay, I'm going to put them over here. And I just wrote. I wrote. And I think I ended up I wasn't quite done with the writing before I decided to go ahead and get an art test piece done. And that is the first test piece, and that was it's Ari and Nisa standing together on the shore. Which isn't this one, it's something else. And I was going to say, okay, how's this going to look? And so I set the art piece up, and I start playing with colors. I'm okay, so I want this colors and that color and these colors and all that kind of stuff. How's this going to look? How's this going to look in my layout? I'm doing some test runs, doing some prototyping of how this is going to look in the layout. And I'm like, cool, it's great, I love it. The problem was that particular pose wasn't going to be as reusable as I thought it was going to be. The way I ended up doing it, I was like, okay, I'm going to do this pose. I'm going to make it something reusable. And it didn't feel right. And that's what led me to go, you know what? I'm going to do individual art pieces for the different scenes. That it's not going to be sprites on a background. It's going to be more like a picture book. And I was like, I'm going to do it. I'm going to do it. It's going to be like a picture book. It's not going to be like a sprite in the background. And I actually don't have all the art pieces in there that I wanted to do. I think I might go back and do more later. I don't know. But what I ended up with is that individual art pieces that were scenes from the story. And I was making art pieces literally until like a 0 hour. I had the game initially programmed, ready to go with just words. I was like, you know what, even if I don't get the art done, I'm going to have something that's functional with words that you can sit down and you can play, and then maybe I'll go add art later. And then after I got that done, I was like, cool. And so then I went back and I started implementing the art pieces. And some art pieces I had done, I think I had the dance one ready to go, and like one other. And so I started implementing art pieces. And I did do some modularity where I could. The dance piece that it should be is the time lapse here. That's Ari as a sprite and Yisa as a sprite, and I do use them individually throughout the story. I did try to conceive of the art pieces in ways that they could be used individually throughout the story. The tricky part of the art, like that wasn't tricky enough, was that I really had this idea that there were some art pieces that just didn't really work vertically. They just didn't. So I was like, well, how do I make them work vertically? My idea was, instead of trying to just make the art work vertically, I was going to have horizontal art as well. And the text boxes were going to change. And I did it. And it was stupid. I'm never going to do it again this way. But I really like what it did, because it let me, first of all, have a little more freedom of, horizontal versus vertical in the art. I could make art that was a little more, that fit the form factor better of what I wanted to do. And I could take those scenes and make sure that those scenes were the ones that were like the most impactful. That those were the scenes where, those the ending scenes. Those are the scenes where something really bad happens or something really good happens. And so thematically, I was able to make it work. Skin of my freaking teeth, I made it work. And I'm going to make a programming video where I'm going to go over how I switch back to 14 boxes and stuff. But that was probably the most challenging part of the art process, was making that decision at the very, kind of like halfway through of, oh, the boxes are going to shift back and forth. I'm going to do this. How the frick do I do this? Because, of course, if you do that, you have to make sure all the UI art works for that. And so that was a tricky thing. It worked. I'm glad I did it, because I was able to see, oh, this is something that's doable. Great. Awesome. So that leaves me with, like I said, this game where the words are on the right, the art is on the left. You have these illustrations that are more like a picture book than the sprite background. And I feel like you really get to see the way Ari and Yisa interact. You really get to see the way they feel about each other and touch each other and interact with each other and manipulate each other and the environment around them. I think that enhances the kind of the text a little bit, even if I didn't get to do as much art as I wanted to. That's definitely a situation where if I were to do this particular style again, I would make sure I had enough time to get more art in. There are definitely some poses I had ready to go, I had modeled out, and didn't get in. And they're really great, and I really wanted to use them. And then in addition to the illustrative art, I had to spend more time than I usually do on the UI in regards to the buttons that appear in my choice screen. And that, I think, is probably the factor that increased the art load as much as it did, because those took time. They took a lot of time. I really wish I had actually screen captured the art process on some of those, because I did some weird ass shit. But overall, they came out really great. I think they look amazing. I'm very happy with them. But it did definitely increase the art load for a game I had not intended to have a very heavy art load. What you gonna do? But in the end, again, I'm happy. I'm happy with how things came out. I like the game. I like the way it looks. I was able to do cool stuff. I did end up changing the way I handled the colors on my illustrations. I'll show a little, you can see the comparison here. This is what I ended up with. This is what I had initially colored. I think those came out a lot better, and they were a little more cohesive looking. And that's something I didn't think about until I got there. I didn't know what I was going to do until I got there. That was a decision I made last minute, and it worked. So, serendipitous. But that is kind of a general overview of kind of how I handled the art for Meninx in a very rambly sort of way. There's going to be a programming video for sure, and so I hope you stick around for it, and I'll show you programmatically how I implemented some of the sprites and some of the art and my crazy ass UI situations, and I really hope you enjoy it, and I hope you stick around.